So I wanted to talk about a man by the name of Steve Laws today, and he recently came on my radar. I saw him on X not too long ago, and I actually looked him up on YouTube, and there's an interview between him and Andrew Gold that I watched a few days ago, and it was a very interesting interview. So I'm going to be talking about that. And I'm going to give you guys my basic overview of all the implications regarding this interview and some of the consequences of the Overton window moving so much further to the right in the last few months. Now, this is going to be a pretty long monologue, maybe about an hour, but I guess I'll give you guys some context. So, Andrew Gold is a British Jew, and he runs a podcast called Heretic or Heretics, and you can think of him like the right-wing Konstantin Kisin. He's a nationalist, he's more conservative in his disposition. Konstantin Kisin is more of like a classical liberal type. And he seems like a decent guy, seems like a good faith interlocutor, and, despite the fact that he's a Zionist, seems all right. So a few days ago, he published an interview that he did with a man by the name of Steve Laws. And Steve Laws gained notoriety within the past year or two for creating a movement called Remigration Now. And the goal of Remigration Now is to remove every non-British person from the UK. Obviously, that means non-whites because he's defining it by ethnicity. So remove every non-British person from the UK, specifically England. He wants to remove every non-British person from England, so remove basically all non-whites and remove any person who is white but not ethnically British, which includes Irish people, plenty of other ethnicities from Western Europe, Southern Europeans, and Eastern Europeans. Now, of course, this is a massive undertaking, and this would include about 14.5 to 14.6 million people based on the last numbers that I looked at. So this is his movement. This is his claim to fame, wanting to get rid of every non-white person and every non-British person from his country. That's how he gained notoriety and fame. Now, the reason I'm even talking about this is because there's so much to unpack here. Pre-modern versus modern values and conceptualizations of morality and rights and liberalism and the role that ethnicity plays in nationhood. We're going to talk about civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. We're going to talk about the praxis and the optics and the tangible benefits or tangible harm caused by platforming somebody like a Steve Laws. There's so many different conversations that I want to get into here. But first, I want to tell you guys why I chose not to react to this interview, because initially what I was going to do was react to this entire interview, upload it to my channel, and leave it at that. But after watching it, I was completely unimpressed and, quite frankly, disheartened by the lack of quality in this interview, the lack of standards. And we'll get into that in a second. But I just want to say at the start, the Overton window shifting so far to the right is, quite frankly, disorienting. The amount of people in the comment section under this video who seem to side with Steve Laws is deeply concerning to me, deeply troubling. People saying he sounds reasonable. In this interview, Steve Laws literally said he would remove half English and half non-English people from the country. So if you have somebody in England who is mixed between English, somebody who is ethnically English, a white English parent, and they have a parent who is not ethnically English, they are Caribbean, they are Pakistani, they are Indian, they are East Asian, that child is going to get thrown out of the country and deported to wherever his parent or his grandparent on his non-English side comes from. And people support this message, which is deeply concerning to me. We're going to break up families based on ethnicity. So you want to remove children from their home in England where their family is, where half their family is, where their father or mother is from. And this is like, and they have citizenship. And this is a completely sane message, apparently. So that's deeply concerning to me. And it's this idea that if your parent is Indian or half Indian, and your child is Indian or a quarter Indian, and maybe we won't even get into quarters because that makes things even more complicated. Let's just say half Indian. If your dad or your mom is half Indian and you are half English and half Indian, you're going to get deported for being a mongrel, as they would put it, and your parent, who's Indian, is going to get deported. So you both are going to get deported to India and be separated from your family in England. And you weren't even born there if you're the kid. So this is collective punishment, clearly. But people actually support this, which is shocking to me. And really sad stuff. This is kind of like the consequence of the Overton window shifting so much further to the right. So that's just to begin. But I want to get into some of the reasons specifically why I'm not reacting to this interview. Number one, and I'm going to go through these quick so I don't bore you guys. Number one, I'm going to just be real. They are operating in the realm of abstraction. They both were the entire interview. The entire interview, they were operating in the realm of abstraction. There was no shared epistemic standard. They kept using words like English, English culture, assimilation over and over and over, and never defined what those words meant. And the reason this is a problem should be self-evident, but I'll give you guys an example. Andrew would say, "What is English?" Steve would say, "Well, it's self-evident." Andrew would say, "Is it based on blood? Is it based on genetics?" Steve would say, "Yes, it is based on blood. It is based on genetics." Andrew would say, "Well, what is the quantity? What is the necessary makeup to be considered English?" And then Steve would evade that and say, "Well, we don't get into the purity spiraling." Well, it's like, hold on. If your entire claim for who is English is based on blood and based on genetics, there needs to be a clear demarcation between who has enough English blood and who does not have enough English blood. That is very important. That is an essential question. Because what's happened over the past 50, 60 years in England is because all these new populations have moved in, people are intermarrying, people are having intercourse, different ethnic groups are having intercourse. You have children out of wedlock, you have mixed race children, you have people with non-English grandparents or non-English family members, non-English cousins. So there's a gradient now in the way the genetics are distributed in the country. So you have to be able to identify, because of how interwebbed or interconnected people are there now, who is and who is not English, who gets to stay and who doesn't get to stay. Because if it's based on genetics as opposed to strictly appearance, well, that means you're kicking out people like Dakota Decheva. Matter of fact, let me pull up a image of Dakota Decheva for you guys so you see who I'm talking about. So this is, oh, hold on, let me go to OBS and show you guys who I'm referring to. This is Dakota Decheva. And she is half Bulgarian, half English. So she has a lot of Bulgarian in her DNA. And let me show you guys her appearance. And you have a lot of people in England that look like this. Now, she looks like a typical English woman. She's half English and half Bulgarian. And you even see here, she's carrying the Bulgarian flag. But she looks like a white British woman. By the way, she's a total badass. She's 15-0 in one champ. Total badass, this woman. Hasn't lost. And I think she's KO'd like 9 of her opponents. But that's neither here nor there. So this is what she looks like. Is this person with a Bulgarian father getting deported from the country? Under his logic? Or by his definitions or by his standards? Because if you apply them and take them to their logical conclusion, this woman is getting deported. She's half Bulgarian. Her mom is English, her dad is Bulgarian. And her dad is 100% Bulgarian. Which would mean Papa has to go. So what I'm trying to understand here is like, what is the consistent standard? Who gets to stay? Who has to go? And Steve wouldn't answer that question. And he wouldn't define who was English. What is the proper quantity for English? If you are, I don't know, let's say 75% English, but you have one Chinese or one Caribbean grandparent, but you look English and you have family that's been in England since like, I don't know, the Norman invasion, 1,000 years, but you have one parent or one grandparent that is Chinese, and they are a recent arrival, but you look English, you look mostly English, but you have maybe a slightly different craniofacial structure. Does that 75% English kid get to stay, or does he have to go because his 25% Chinese genetics will dilute the purity of the English stock? Of course, grandma's got to go. She's Chinese. Bye-bye, grandma. Back to fucking Shanghai for you. But does the grandkid get to stay? Does the parent, who's half Chinese, get to stay? These are important questions. You're going to break up a lot of families doing this, a lot of families. And you think people are just going to go for it? Ridiculous. So anyways, that's the first reason. No shared epistemic standards. They're talking past each other the whole time, which of course is going to happen. If you have one definition of assimilation, the other person has a different definition of assimilation, but you keep using the same word, but you're implying different things, you will never reach understanding. You will continue to talk past one another. That's the major reason. The first major reason why I did not react to this interview. And let me try and speed up a bit here. The second one is because it isn't that interesting. There is no substance. Steve Laws is not a deep thinker. He's an ideologue. He's not somebody who can reason beyond his own ideology. He cannot do it. So it makes for a very boring and repetitive conversation. He would make a false premise, follow up that false premise with a fallacious assertion. Andrew would counter argue it, and then he would dismiss it and say, I don't care about that. I only care about my people. My people are the English. England for the English. Very basic second grade reasoning. That's the second reason. And then the third one, and this is the last one. I did not react to this interview because Andrew was unprepared. He looked completely out of his depth. And what I mean is, if somebody is going to come to your platform and you disagree with their position, you have to be able to challenge them on an epistemological, a philosophical, and an empirical level. If you cannot do that, what are you doing? Unless he just brought him on the podcast to give him a fair hearing, which I think is insane, considering this guy wants to kick you out of the country for being a Jew. Be that as it may, if you cannot challenge his claims on these three major bases, epistemological, philosophical, and empirical, then you're going to fail. You're going to lose the debate, or you're going to look horrible throughout the conversation. You will falter, you will flail. And that's what happened to Andrew. He started to look desperate about 25 minutes through. And what I mean by epistemological is, how did you reach that conclusion? How did you gain that knowledge? Is it just based on intuition, or is there data? Is there evidence supporting these wild conclusions you're making about all these non-whites jeopardizing the survival of the English people? Killing them, displacing them, dispossessing them, as he says. Is that just intuition, or what evidence did you use to reach that conclusion? You have to challenge his knowledge. You have to challenge the intellectual or cognitive steps and walk them back to see how he reached these conclusions. That's very important. It takes skill to be able to do that. He obviously lacks that skill. That's number one. Number two, you have to challenge him philosophically. His philosophical, his foundational moral claim is that because I have ancestry that's been in this country for a long time, I automatically have the right to expel millions of people from this country. And Andrew just took that for granted. He never pushed back on that claim. That is literally his premise. That is the premise for his entire ideology. I have ancestry that's been here longer. Thus, I can expel you from this country. I can expel you from this territory. Why is that a moral claim? What about that is philosophically or morally defensible? You have to be able to scrutinize his philosophy. That is so important. And he never did it. Complete wasted opportunity. The last part is, and this was the easiest one, and he still didn't do it. Why didn't you ask him about the empirical data behind his beliefs? Why didn't you ask him about the logistics? Why didn't you ask him about the law in place? You didn't even ask him about civil liberties, individual rights, proceduralism, the British Constitution or the English Constitution, whatever they have over there. Because contrary to popular opinion, laws do still matter. And if you want to remove 14.5 or 14.6 million people from the country, you're going to need the military. And the military is loyal to the law. It's loyal to the state. It is not loyal to one person's qualms about ethnic differences. That is not what the military is for. So you will have to fundamentally change the law to get the military on your side. The military is loyal to the state. It is not loyal to your stupid ideology about wanting total remigration. Why didn't Andrew ask him about that? That is a fundamental question. How will you get the military on your side? How will you change the laws? Or will you just ignore the laws? You're just going to will your way to power, rise your way to power, become the prime minister, ignore all of parliament, ignore every vote of no confidence, coup the government, then force the military to back you and kick 14.5 million non-whites out of the country or non-British people out of the country. You're just going to do that? You're just going to walk your way into that? Please explain to me how that works step by step, logistically. How it's so stupid. It's so ridiculous. And Andrew never brought that up. How do you not bring that up? How do you not bring up individual rights? How do you not bring up the law? How do you not bring up civil liberties? That's literally what England is built on. Like, you can't just conveniently dismiss all those obstacles, jump over them, hurdle right over them, take power, will your way to power, and kick 14.6 million people out of the country and completely evade the law. That is, please explain to me how you're going to accomplish that. We have no explanation on that front yet. So I don't know why Andrew never asked him about that. He also never asked him about all the consequences that would come from this. I mean, this guy would literally kill his country trying to pull something like this off. Kill his country. You would collapse health services. People in retirement homes would die. I mean, what, a quarter of England's economy is sustained by foreigners or non-whites? Your entire healthcare, health services industry, people who are pushing 80-year-olds around in wheelchairs in the hospital, or giving them their medicine, or dealing with demented 75-year-old men in their homes or in care centers, they would be abandoned. Potentially they'd die if you tried to deport all these people and you didn't have the labor necessary to sustain the economy in the meantime. You'd mess up ports. You'd mess up manufacturing. You'd slow down public transportation. Completely bring the entire economy to a standstill. You would have probably some kind of race war, some kind of civil war. Lots of white people would stand up and probably get killed in the process if you were able to even pull something like this off, or if you even tried to pull something like this off. You'd have terrorism. You would have political assassinations. You'd have people mutiny from the military. You'd have the UN trying to sanction you, arms embargoes on your country. You would lose all foreign investment. You would kill your country. Spiritually, you'd kill your country. You would kill a lot of your own countrymen in the process. Many of them would betray you. This idea that, like, every English person is going to side with you is a complete pipe dream. I don't know how he didn't bring any of this up. You have to hold your frame in these conversations, so It's just ridiculous. So many different things he could have pushed on, so many different things he could have attacked Steve Laws on, and he completely just never got around to it. What a wasted opportunity, a complete disappointment. So, like I said, those are some of the few major reasons I didn't react to this interview. No shared epistemic standards. Steve Laws cannot think beyond his ideology, and we're not even talking about anything concrete. We're not talking about law, philosophy. We're not talking about epistemology. We're not talking about data or empirics. We're not talking about the actual consequences this would have on this country. We're not talking about the fact that you would literally cause protests, violent clashes between white English people in the streets against the military trying to occupy the whole country, riots, protests, insurgency, far right activism, far right violence, far left violence. I mean, it would be complete pandemonium throughout the whole country. It's like he hasn't thought any of that through. And we're not going to touch on any of that. We're just going to launder his ideas to the public and never unpack them, never actually talk about the implications or the destruction that they would wage on his country. It's, I don't even know what to say. Truly, all of it is shocking. It's truly shocking, is what it is. I don't know how is none of that ever touched on? How was none of that ever touched on throughout the entire 1 hour and 20 minutes of the conversation? I don't get that. What a complete failure in terms of prep from Andrew. So anyways, that's the reason why I didn't react to it. Very shallow, not based in reality, and no shared definitions. Now, with that said, I want to talk about the implications of this interview and what it represents for the discourse. And this is something that I was thinking about. I was like, do I even want to react to this video? Is there even a point? Or is the algorithm just going to see the fact that I put Steve Laws in the title and show me to a right-wing audience and bring a reactionary, narrow-minded group of people to my channel? And I don't want them. I don't want anything to do with these people. I want them gone. I don't mind having a right-wing audience, but I want political enthusiasts. I want critical thinkers. I want open-minded people. I want people with fresh perspectives. That's what I want. True intellectual engagement. That would be nice. Not just like sheep. Not just like angry spurgs, terminally online, far-right reactionaries. I don't really want anything to do with these people. I'm interested in talking about post-liberal ideas, more positive forms of nationalism, what I call transcendental nationalism, from people like Giuseppe Mazzini and Johann Herder and Johann Fitch. Things like Volksgeist, the spirit of the nation, civic perfectionism. I want to talk about national service, mandatory national service, these sorts of things. Improving civic curriculum, forming moral character using public education, these sorts of things. How do we create a more spiritually powerful society? How do we create a society that transcends its id and achieves its super ego? These are the kinds of questions I want to talk about, these more interesting things. But naturally, because I talk about Steve Laws and these more reactionary topics as it relates to right-wing media, it does attract a particular audience. So that's sometimes the reason why I'm hesitant to talk about these sorts of things. It's for that very reason. I don't want an audience full of troglodytes. Now, with that said, I want to talk about the praxis here. One thing I realize is that really, what is the point of interviewing a person like Steve Laws? Because I was thinking to myself, even if you win the logical argument, even if you win the moral argument, ultimately it's a Pyrrhic victory if you have to debate him in a serious manner. And the reason why this is a Pyrrhic victory is because what it looks like optically. You have a guy who is advocating the ethnic cleansing of millions of people from his country, and he's going to install an authoritarian government, completely bypass the law, shut down his whole economy, basically create nationwide unrest, violence, potentially terrorism, invite sanctions and embargoes. And we're going to treat this guy like he's a normal person worthy of like rational discussion. We're going to debate his ideas like they're normal, sane ideas. The fact that we're even legitimizing these ideas in the first place is already a major loss. Seriously. And I don't mean to sound woke. I don't mean to sound like the left. Oh, we shouldn't platform certain people. But just think about it. Imagine this. Imagine you have this guy come onto your podcast, and this guy says, I want to liberate North Korea. I want to make North Korea a democratic, socialist, pro-immigration, diverse society. Imagine that person comes onto your podcast and says that. And you ask him, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that exactly? How are you going to liberate North Korea? How are you going to overthrow their government? And how are you going to denuclearize their country and basically end this martial ethos that has been dominating this country for like the better part of a decade or 2 decades even, or maybe even longer than that? How do you plan on doing that? And this guy thinks he's going to like go in there and do it himself. Even having that person on your podcast and like debating that idea as if it's even serious is dumb. It's not serious. Because even if you win the argument, even if you completely demolish all of his talking points, the fact that you even treated him like he was worthy of serious consideration to begin with already puts you on the back foot. And maybe that's not a good example, but that's basically what it is with Steve Laws. You have a guy who wants to abandon all norms, all principles, completely degrade the political order, the international order, dehumanize millions of people, ignore their citizenship, ignore the fact that they have equal rights, and remove them from the country because of their ethnicity, and he assumes the military is just going to support him in that endeavor. And we're going to treat that guy like he's normal? We're going to treat that idea like it's a normal idea? We're going to try to debate the merit of what he's saying as if it's not fucking batshit crazy? The things that the internet will normalize will never cease to amaze me. Truly. I mean, look, am I the crazy one here? You guys tell me in the comments. Am I the crazy one here? Am I high? Am I like missing something? Is this like a normal idea? We're going to remove millions, tens of millions of people from the country, violate all their rights, so we can operate on like this more base level of tribal panic. Because that's what it is. There's 2 layers here. And he seems to think that the outer layer has no value. And what I mean is there's kinds of 2 layers in this conversation. There's the layer of the political order. We're talking about liberalism. We're talking about individual rights, civil liberties, limits of government, proceduralism, having to go through certain procedures before you can change the law. We're operating from a more modern understanding of how the world works. And this guy is operating at the second layer, which is a more pre-modern understanding of the way the world works, which is there are certain ethnic groups, certain cultures, certain territories, finite resources, and we have to basically completely abandon this first layer, the outer crest, the modern layer, that political order, abandon all that, and then retreat to this subterranean layer on ethnic group versus ethnic group, tribe versus tribe, finite resources. We got to displace you before you displace us, whilst completely abandoning the more applicable layer, the more prescient layer, which limits people from being able to engage in this kind of barbarism. Tribe versus tribe, nation versus nation, race versus race, ethnicity versus ethnicity. He seems to think that that bottom layer is the only thing that applies in this equation. And that top layer just completely doesn't matter. And it's even very presumptuous. This idea that every white person, white English person in that country would default to this more subterranean layer, this more base layer. Ethnic group versus ethnic group, race versus race, tribe versus tribe. Finite resources on this territory, so we have to forcibly remove you to protect our resources and our territory. And there's no other moral or legal implications that need to be considered. It's a very old world mindset, pre-modern mindset. And I'm not going to say pre-modernism and pre-modern values and the way the world was organized before the modern era, before the Enlightenment, before liberalism doesn't matter. 100% it does, unquestionably. We evolved that way for a reason. But what he is touching on here, it's just like, I don't even really know what to say other than the fact that it's almost a call for barbarism. It's a call for violence. It's a call for race versus race. A race war, in a sense. It's just the most bizarre thing on the planet. I really don't know what to make of this guy's positions here, or why we're even trying to treat them as if they're normal. I think that's a complete failure. Now, I'll just say this. As it pertains to the interview, because there is some interesting stuff here in regards to the conversation around civic and ethnic nationalism. So I guess we can define it like this, and I guess these are some of my basic beliefs about the civic versus ethnic nationalism debate. So let's start with definitions. So civic nationalism is effectively the idea that a state should be unified, or rather, a nation should be unified by certain ideals, values, civic virtues, institutions, and laws, and that it is the state's responsibility to use its power and influence to unify the nation based on these aspects of national identity and based on these kinds of civic values. That is what civic nationalism is. The glue that holds the country together should be based on ideals, values, and civic virtues and laws, and that the state should guarantee that those things prevail. Then you have ethnic nationalism, which is the idea that a nation should be defined primarily by ancestry or heritage as opposed to shared civic values or political participation, and that the state should act as the guarantor of a particular ethnic group's demographic, political, social, and cultural dominance. So, those are some of the basic definitions of civic versus ethnic nationalism. And really, what is a nation? And this is kind of at the core of it. What is a nation? Well, a nation is a distinct group of people with a shared identity that is united by common markers. To reiterate, it is a distinct group of people, which means they can be distinct or they can be um, differentiated from other nations. They have distinct qualities. So a nation is a distinct group of people with a shared identity that is united by common markers like one's country, symbols, mythology, history, language, territory, culture, values, political structure, and, in most cases, ethnicity and religion. So that is what a nation is. It is a group of people that is united, that is distinct, but united by common markers that range from civics and religion and history and symbols and territory to ethnicity and heritage. And one thing I've come to consider more often, especially as I have aged and developed in my political understanding, especially as it pertains to this interview, And this is the reason why now I consider myself to be a post-liberal. And post-liberalism is kind of this philosophy that I gathered from Adrian Vermeule and Patrick Deneen. And it's this idea that the liberal individualist world order cannot hold mass societies together, or they are fragile and fragmented, and people will resort to these subnational identities like race or ethnicity or sex and so on and so forth if there's no common civic or moral or religious or ethnic glue holding those people together. And I agree with that idea. I think post-liberalism, some of their stuff is actually really good, especially some of the Catholic integralist stuff. And one thing I've realized, especially in the past few weeks, the more I read about nations and the history of nationalism, and I listen to debates like this between people like Steve Laws and Andrew Gold, is that the more durable aspects of identity, like religion, ethnicity, family, tribe, culture, language, these sorts of things, they have outlasted empires. They have existed throughout several epochs of time. They have outlasted displacement, migration, natural disasters, and so on and so forth. And they bond people together in a deep and meaningful way. And that is not something we can ignore in pursuit of these more modern conceptions of identity and this idea that, like, it's entirely conceptual, it's entirely subjective, it is not rooted in these more primordial identities like ethnicity or religion or tribe, and that these sorts of identities do not have a substantive effect in shaping social dynamics and politics when they absolutely do. And so this is why I'm sympathetic from, or at least I'm sympathetic to many of the arguments from the more reactionary the more white reactionaries, I guess is the term you would use. I'm sympathetic to many of the arguments from white reactionaries about the white demographic decline and pausing mass migration. And they're totally legitimate arguments based in an evolutionary mindset about loss of nation, loss of um, about change, about unpredictability, loss of control, loss of cultural influence. Totally legitimate. The question, though, is, does that give you the right to harm other people? I don't think it does. There just has to be a peaceful resolution. There has to be a synthesis. That's always been my opinion. And I don't agree with the post-World War II order, because this is where all of this comes from. This is where all this modern, postmodern stuff comes from. Fear about nationalism, nations, people organizing based on ethnicity or religion or family or tribe, which I agree there is higher order goods to pursue. I'll get to that in a second. But before I get there, I'll just say I don't agree with the post-World War II order, which essentially argues that the role of the state is to be a neutral actor, and it exists only to uphold the law and individual rights, while taking a back seat on moral standards and implicitly suggesting that multiculturalism is the ultimate principle. I don't think the state should do that. The state exists to do more than just uphold individual rights, which is a very liberal perspective. The state exists to do more than just uphold individual rights or uphold the Constitution. The state has the power and exists to uphold the moral and ethical character of the nation, to shape the nation in a sense, by exercising its will, by acting in its best interest, by enforcing moral standards. I don't think the state exists just to be this backseat arbiter or administrator of the law. It can do so much more, and it exists to do so much more. And why do you think nations like states? Nations and states go hand in hand. Nations like and love states because they can exercise their will through the state, and because the state will protect its nation and represent its nation and represent its morals and its character, which is a beautiful thing. It's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. But it should not lose. We're called nation states for a reason. The state should not treat the nation like it's just this loose collection of individuals. It is a actual thing. It does mean something. Being an American does mean something. Contrary to what many white nationalists say, oh, well, anybody can be an American, so being an American means nothing. No, there is a ethno-cultural substrate here. Anglo-Protestant, people assimilate, and people retain some of their own ethnic and cultural practices and ethnicity, or consciousness rather. But by and large, after 3 or 4 generations, they're very assimilated and they're very American. And that means something because Americans are distinct from basically every other group of people in terms of our historical consciousness, in terms of our values, in terms of the nations and countries that we're connected to. Even insofar as the fact that we are coterminous with other nations. Even places like Canada or New Zealand, which are also a part of the Anglosphere, we are still different from those places as Americans. We are more religious. We are more individualist. We are more patriotic. I would even argue more nationalistic. So, no, your nation does matter, and the state should fight for you, and the state should represent you, and the state should treat you as a whole. And yes, the state should uphold morals. It should not be unsure about morality. It should not be unsure or timid about ethics. Because think about what happens when the state behaves as if that is the case. When the state acts as if multiculturalism is the ultimate principle. You get stuff like what's happening in England. People are swearing in on the Pali Canon. They're swearing in on the, I don't know, the Hindu book of religion. They're swearing in on the Quran, all these random religious texts. And they're acting like that is the highest good. Multiculturalism is the highest good, which is not honest. It implies that all cultures have an equal stake and all cultures have had an equal influence on building England, which is not true. The state of England needs to be explicit and say, this is an English country. We speak English. This is an ethnically English country. Yes, it should say that and be explicit about it. And it should also say that our culture is the dominant culture. If you don't like that, you need to go. Or you have to assimilate. There has to be some pressure holding people together. I fully agree with that. It's something deeper. It's something more spiritual there other than just like this apathetic, state-enforced liberalism, which is very withdrawn and very disconnected. And what happens when the state does not explicitly endorse its own culture over others? It basically creates room for, I don't want to say colonization, but for other cultures that are foreign to grow and develop and change your society, which is probably not a good idea. You want your country to be an English country. That is a good thing. There's beauty in that. There's something cool about that. And when the state, like I said, does not endorse certain morals or certain virtue or certain standards, that's how you end up with craziness like children on hormone therapy at 8 years old, or men competing in women's sports, or no-fault divorce laws, these sorts of things. This idea that morals and truth are relative and that the state should not act to uphold moral standards creates chaos. Actually, it's so dishonest to assume that all cultures in various countries like America, like Canada, like New Zealand, like England, like France, it is so dishonest to assume that the culture of the French, the culture of the English, the culture of the Anglos here was not the dominant culture in building these societies. To act as if it's always been multicultural, everybody has the same stake in building this. It's not true. It's not real. It's not accurate. It's dishonest. It's intellectually dishonest. And it needs to stop. So that's kind of why I'm, on some level, understanding and sympathetic to guys like Nick Fuentes at times, not all the time, but I understand some of the basic grievances. That doesn't mean they're justified in kicking people out of the country on their own whim. That's completely out of the question. But I understand at least the basic argument. There is merit to it. And, I guess this kind of brings me to my final point about solutions, in regards to Britain, because, oh Lord, America is a completely different beast. It's such a huge country. It's way more diverse. It's way bigger. It's not nearly as old as England. And we've had basically waves of immigration coming to this country for hundreds of years. It's not like a recent phenomenon. So, that said, I guess in regards to Britain, it is a country in need of a spiritual revival. I think it is the role of the state. This is what I suggest. It is the role of the state. This is a first principle to explicitly claim that England is an English country predicated on English culture and values as they define it. And yes, it is the homeland of the English. That is unquestionable. And, this is something I was talking about with my dad not too long ago. And, he called me on the phone and he took umbrage with me. And, I got a bit defensive. I was a bit flippant. But in retrospect, I understand where my dad was coming from. But basically, this is what the conversation was. So I think in one of my previous videos, I said something to the effect of the United States should remain a majority white country. I said something to that effect. And he took umbrage with that claim and he called me on the phone. He was pretty bothered. He said something to the effect of the United States doesn't need to remain a majority white country. It needs to remain a nation that emphasizes hard work and family and merit and the Constitution and self development and education and rule of law. And regardless of race, if they hold those values, they should be welcomed. And, at first, I was a bit defensive when he said that. I agreed in principle, but I was a bit defensive when he said that because I thought it was a bit Pollyannish. But, in retrospect, I appreciate his idealism. There's something meaningful there. And I guess I'll just lay out my case about why I said that. Because, like I said, there's a pre modern and modern understanding here. So I wasn't able to express my viewpoint to him on the phone. I couldn't articulate it because he kind of had me on the spot. But I guess the idea here is that, look, my thought process was for basically 200 years, from 1790 to 1965, America was very self-conscious about its immigration policy for obvious reasons. It is a lot easier to unite and assimilate into a whole populations of people with similar ancestry, with similar cultures, with similar religions, with similar ways of being, with similar values. And to reduce the potential for social fragmentation, the founders intentionally limited citizenship to Northwestern Europeans for obvious reasons, because they kind of intuitively knew that bringing in people from India and China and Japan would create a cultural conflict. People with different religions would create religious conflict. Potentially, it could fragment the society. And so you wanted people who could kind of assimilate and blend in a lot easier. They were very self-conscious about it. And, for logical reasons. And so, as time progressed, Italian and Irish, and other Eastern Europeans and Catholics and Polish people and Greeks and all the rest of them, they were let in, but in very limited numbers because they wanted to retain this ethnocultural Northwestern European Protestant Anglo foundation. So they let in other Southern and Eastern Europeans and Central Europeans. They let them in, but in very small quantities. And I guess the idea here was to maintain the foundation, maintain the founding demographic and culture of the country, to preserve its coherence and to help it maintain its success, because it was built on this culture and it succeeded and became a global empire and a superpower. And so logically, one would assume that if you want to continue these positive trends, you would keep that demographic, right? It makes sense intuitively. And here's my thing, I generally take, well, I'll just say this. The idea here was they wanted to retain a certain ethnocultural foundation. And if you want to retain the country's kind of success, you want to bring in people that resemble the ethnocultural populations that founded the country. You want to continue that trend ad nauseum. It makes sense intuitively. I get it. As opposed to bringing in very different people in large numbers, right? And I generally do take a pre-modern understanding on these sorts of matters. The more, like I said, the more durable aspects of identity, religion, culture, ethnicity, tribe, family, the nation, these sorts of things, they create the foundation that political order is built on. And this is where it gets interesting. If you stray too significantly from the foundation that built your country, you can potentially destabilize the political order that made the country successful to begin with. And that was always my reasoning about, keeping the country majority white. It wasn't for like any white supremacist or, ideological reason. It was more so for like these kinds of pragmatic and pre-modern understandings of basic intuition on how you think the world would work. And, that was kind of my reasoning. And that's why I think that we should have a strict immigration policy and kind of enforce assimilation on people who want to immigrate here, and that the state, the US government, should openly endorse Anglo-Protestant culture. I think that's totally fine. I think that's totally appropriate. English as the national language, Christianity as our bonding religion, as our nation's religion, I think that's totally valid. It's been that way forever, since the start. And we should be proud of that. I don't think that the state should back away from that. I don't think the state should say, well, we're just a country of many people with different cultures and liberal individuals with different values. And no. You got to bond people together. You have to tell us what you're about. We're not just a liberal individualist society. We are more than that. We do have roots. We do have a history. We do have an ethos. And the state should endorse it. I see no problem with that. And obviously, people still should have the right under the First Amendment to retain their own religious practices, to retain their own culture at home, practice it at home, even open up a business. But I'm saying at the state level, at the institutional level, it should be clear what we are as a country. It should not be up for debate. It should not be up for question. It should be very explicit. It kind of gives people a sense of security and certainty. When it's all just multiculturalism and liberal individualism, there is no clarity on what we are, on who we are, on what we're about, on where we came from, when there's clear answers to that, rooted in history. So that was kind of the thing with my dad. Now, I will say this in his defense. At the same time, and we'll move back to, the debate between Andrew Gold and Steve Laws in a moment, but I will say, in my dad's defense, I appreciate his more romantic view of politics, and it's something that I've kind of embraced as well. Politics is not all ethnicity versus ethnicity, social control, controlling certain territory, order. It's not all war and fighting and violence and Machiavellianism. No. Politics is a lot more than that. That's kind of like the underbelly, the shadow of politics. But politics, when done well, you can achieve a kind of civic perfectionism if you handle the basics, and we'll get to that. But I was going to say, I do appreciate my dad's romantic view of politics and of the country, because I believe there are higher order political goods, moral goods, social goods that are worth pursuing, like justice, like dignity, like solidarity, like a shared national purpose. But the problem is those goods can only be meaningfully pursued on top of a stable foundation. And if that foundation collapses, the ideals that we're trying to pursue will collapse as well, or the ideals that were built on this foundation will collapse as well, and people will return to a kind of razor sharp Carl Schmitt friend enemy distinction when the political order breaks down. And here's basically the way it works. When people's faith in the stability, or rather when people's faith in the state and its ability to guarantee basic forms of order, like public safety, like border security, like economic stability, like meaningful work, functioning infrastructure, politics rooted in citizenship rather than identity or race, when the state stops guaranteeing people's ability to form families and afford them, when the state stops guaranteeing long-term demographic stability and continuity, everything begins to feel unstable, and this kind of political order begins to break down. And these higher ideals begin to feel hollow. They feel like rhetoric rather than reality, which is logical. It's like, if your government can't provide meaningful work or citizenship rooted in, or rather politics rooted in citizenship rather than identity, if the state can't guarantee family formation, affordable housing, long-term demographic continuity, border security, economic stability, if the state cannot guarantee any of those things, but they're still trying to tell you that we're a liberal country and we're multicultural and it's really working, you just don't realize it, everybody's going to start viewing these higher order ideals like they're lies, which is what we're seeing right now. And it's like, at a certain point, once the state fails to maintain its basic obligations and uphold a certain political order, ideas such as, for example, America is a melting pot, or our trust in the institutions, or this idea that we live in a post-racial society that's actually unified based on citizenship, or values like liberal universalism, or national solidarity, all that kind of stuff begins to feel hollow. It begins to feel like a lie when the state fails to live up to those ideals, when it can't enforce them. And at that point, politics stops being deliberative and it becomes existential. When the state cannot fulfill its basic obligations to its nation, cynicism sets in, social trust begins to erode, and the political order begins to decay. And I think that this is exactly what we're seeing really broadly across the entire Western world today. So as a result, what happens? People start to abandon the higher order moral commitments in favor of self-preservation and identity-based thinking. Sacrifice and good faith, between different groups of people, men and women, blacks and whites, it no longer feels mutual. Because most people begin to believe that the standards are not applied equally. That's a breakdown in political and social order. And solidarity begins to feel impossible once people become cynical. Moderation feels ineffective, or moderate politics feels ineffective. And a belief that nothing changes through restraint or compromise becomes widespread and calls for authoritarian governments, radical action begin to set in. And this is what really kills the political order and the social order. And when that happens, you get people like Steve Laws, when things go way off the rails and his ideas become way more palatable once the social and political order breaks down. And this is the fault of the state. So when this happens, people gravitate towards more extreme solutions. This us versus them mindset takes over. And once politics is reduced to existential struggle, the moral foundations that sustain political order begin to erode. Now, with that said, I don't think that means people should abandon these higher order goods entirely. But we just have to make sure that we prioritize the basic needs and try to achieve them using a sensible approach. And like I said, you cannot have a civic order, a high moral order, a social order, a moral order without meeting these basic requirements: demographic continuity, politics based on citizenship rather than race, border security, economic security, housing security, financial security. Without those things, the social and political and moral order will erode, and people will take more radical approaches and lose faith in solidarity. It happens every single time. And so this is kind of where Steve Laws comes back in. It's important to understand that when the social order and the moral order and the political order breaks down because the state fails to protect its own people, to protect its native population, and to integrate immigrants, people like Steve Laws begin to look a lot more reasonable, a lot more palatable, a lot more sensible. And this is what really kills the political order. And this is how fascists come to power. But it's just true. This is how it works. This is how fascists come to power. This is how terrible people come to power every time. And I guess I'll put it this way. Initially, I was trying to find logical, even moral arguments for deconstructing Steve Laws' worldview. But I understood that past a certain point, I wasn't thinking about it correctly. There's something that I was missing, something deeper. Because trying to deconstruct his reasoning logically and morally is not sufficient for understanding why we, and by we I mean minorities and Jews and whoever else, even liberal white people or white people who don't agree with him, why we feel so concerned. Because it goes beyond just this logical or moral argumentation. I'm more than concerned on a moral level when I hear this kind of stuff. I'm mortified. I think mortified and deeply perplexed and shocked are the proper words to use here. Because I don't think it's fruitful to try to understand a guy like Steve Laws through the lens of morality or logic, because that's not where he's operating from. He is operating from this Neolithic mindset, pure instinct and primordial rage. It's like this fight or flight, us versus them, Carl Schmitt, friend enemy distinction mindset. And Leo Strauss would say something similar, where when politics is reduced to existential life or death, when it's reduced to ethnicity versus ethnicity, fighting over finite resources because the state cannot ensure order, that is a sure sign of political death, of social death. And that is what's happening in the UK, social death. That society is dying. Spiritually, it's dying. Socially, it's dying. But Steve Laws is misattributing the root of that problem. And the root of that problem is coming from the state, the government, the corrupt oligarchs running his country, the business interests, the special interests, the capital interests. But this is what happens. This sharp friend-enemy distinction takes over, which is what we're seeing with these guys, these total remigration guys in England, telling this Jew whose family has been there since before 1900, who's perfectly assimilated, that he can't live there because he's a Jew. We're not even thinking in the context of political or social order. We're thinking in the context of existential tribe versus tribe. So I don't think it's, like I said, it's not fruitful to look at him through the lens of logic or morality even. And my bewilderment is really that he doesn't seem to see non-white people as having a moral claim to England, regardless of how well assimilated they are, how well adjusted their families are, how many generations their people have been in the country, or whether or not they're Christians or patriotic or have family from the service, or whether or not half of their family is even English. It's like, think about this. His problem is not with the state, which is weird. His problem is with his Pakistani neighbor who was born and raised in England, has family and friends and community and memories and a life and an appreciation for the country, and maybe even has a half English kid. But it's like none of that matters to Steve Laws, because he views this Pakistani guy, who is a perfectly kind man, as being nothing more than diseased livestock that needs to be culled from the national body. It's dehumanizing to a degree I can't even fully put into words. And what England represents to this Pakistani guy who was born there is home. England represents his home, a place where he accumulated memories and a life. And what Steve Laws does, it's so brutish and unromantic. He reduces England, this home for this guy, to nothing more than a territory that is defined by demographic ratios and ethnic domination, not anything beyond that, not anything higher than that. It is so spiritually empty, which is, I think, what's so mortifying about it to me. And I think what makes it worse, because I'm trying to put into words my deep discomfort and mortification with this interview and with this man. It's like, at least in the past, people justified their corruption using a pretext. Kings would use God. Emperors like Caesar discussed wanting to return to order and virtue. Even tyrants talked about being the product of destiny. Even with white nationalists like Fuentes, and I don't agree with them at all, but at least with them, there is a pretense about restoring social order, a Christian order that exists under the Catholic Church. At least there's something spiritual there, something deeper there, something more rooted there, something spiritual, transcendental in a sense there, even if it's abusive. With Steve Laws, there is none of that. There is no spiritual pretense. None of that. It is completely brutish and survivalist. He's just making demands. He's making demands, and he's giving no pretext other than genetics and tribal reasoning in the most cold and blunt way imaginable. It's like, hey, you 14.6 million non-British people living in the country, we don't owe you any reason. We don't owe you any persuasion. We don't owe you any moral recognition. We don't even owe you the pretense of law. None of it. We don't owe you any justification. You just have to get the fuck out of the country because you're not a part of my group. Get the fuck off this land. Not out of England, off of this land. It's like this naked desire to displace other people and destabilize your country in the process, and literally destroy millions of people's lives for no reason other than genetics or ethnicity and race. And suffering to him is irrelevant. The suffering he inflicts, even on his own people, which will happen, the suffering he inflicts on other ethnic groups and his own people is completely irrelevant. And moral claims and the law are just inconveniences and noise. It's like nobody seems to understand the gravity of what this guy is trying to do. It's really weird and concerning. Seriously. It is deeply dehumanizing to see these people, these immigrants, these 14.6 million non-British people from wherever they might come from. It is deeply dehumanizing to see them as nothing more than a contagion in your society. That's very sad to think like that. It's just a dark way of thinking. Such a dark way of thinking. Like I said, there's not even a spiritual pretense here. It'd be, at least if it was religious, it would be one thing. It's not even religious. It's not even about getting Muslims out because they're a different religion. At least there's some like cultural difference there. You could kind of be like, okay, I get it. You know, you don't want a lot of Muslims there. They're endogamous. You know, they don't assimilate. They only marry other Muslims. They have their own way of dress. They eat their own food. They have their own diet. They have their own gender roles and family structures. They can't really be assimilated. And then they have all these external reference points. They have a mosque. They have social media. It's very hard to disconnect them from the Muslim world. You can't really assimilate a Muslim. Okay, I get that. That's a valid argument. But to say nothing more than your genetics cannot be allowed to exist on this land, there's something so barbaric, dark, dehumanizing about that. Your genetics cannot be allowed to exist on this land. It's just like, when you put it in its most simple terms, you begin to understand the insanity of what this guy is arguing for. It's like humans are just variables, and your suffering is just an inconvenient externality, and any moral questions or any questions about the law, they're of no concern. Wow. And people in England support this guy. And you know what? Honestly, shame on every single one of them for having no higher moral aspiration, no higher emotional aspiration or civic aspiration. They've just completely given up. It's a social death, and that social death is being used as their pretext to harm other people and accelerate the death of their own country. Because that is what Steve Laws represents, the acceleration of the death of England. That is what he is. He will not save England. He will kill England and get a lot of people from England killed in the process. His own countrymen, his own kin, his own race, his own ethnicity. And does he not seem to understand this? By completely abandoning a higher spiritual order and going back to straight, sheer barbarism, a horrible idea. That is a very dark path to go down. And maybe I sound very emotional here, and I'm sorry if I do, but I'm just like perplexed. Let me just, you know what? I'll just pull up some of the comments for you guys, so you can really put into perspective the insanity of this. All right. It's on YouTube. All right, let's check this out. It's just, this whole thing is just completely absurd pandemonium. I don't really know how else to address what these people are going for other than putting it in like the most blunt and dark and just plain terms, like what they're trying to accomplish here and the kind of suffering he's going to cause, the kind of hell he's going to unleash. And that nobody seems to realize it. Okay, so I'm not even going to watch the whole video or even parts of the video. I'm just going to show you guys the comments here. Listen to what it says here. Okay, let me pull this up for you guys. So these are the comments on, here we go. These are the comments on the video. The center has failed to listen, and so here we are, 1.9K views. There will be more and more people like Steve if the immigration problem is not solved. A homeland for me, but not for thee. Your homeland for me, but not for thee. Okay, Andrew, gotcha. I find myself a lot closer to Steve than whatever the hell has happened to Europe. There's plenty more in here. Overton window being shifted. I don't think Andrew understands how many white working men agree with Steve. Fascinating. So apparently a lot of, and 2.2K likes. So apparently a lot of white men in England also want to kick out 14.6 million non-white people from the country and abandon the political order. Um, and look, I'm not saying the political order is inherently good, but it's certainly a hell of a lot better than accelerating towards a race war, an ethnic war, or some kind of civil war, which is, I mean, this could be a serious catalyst to something like that. Um, Steve exists to move the Overton window. Does Andrew not see the irony of a Jew telling an Englishman that he can't have his own country back? Taking your own country back, when people say that, it's such like a vague slogan. It's like such a nothing statement. How do you take your own country back if you live in your own country? If you own property in your own country? If you have citizenship in your country and it's not being taken from you? How is your what do you mean you're taking your country back? Your country was never taken from you. You still live there. Nobody's forcing you to leave. Your government is run by English people. This is like such a low IQ statement. It's not based in reality. I'm Chinese born but raised in the UK. I understand how Steve is feeling and don't resent him. You can understand how he's feeling, but you're Chinese and this guy wants to kick you out of the country. So why are you being a cuck? Interesting. Don't think this podcast came off how you think it did. People are fed up. Racist means nothing anymore. Enough is enough. I mean, look, nobody is even going to bat against him. Everybody seems to be in agreement and alignment with laws, which is a fascinating, a truly fascinating development if you can consider where we were 3, 4, 5 years ago. This kind of conversation was not even on the table. So truly it is remarkable what has happened in the past 5 years with Nick Fuentes and Elon Musk acquiring Twitter and all the reactionary slop on that app now. I don't even know what to make of it. So that's Steve Laws for you. I'm not even going to belabor this. I think this is a completely absurd idea. And what he's trying to do will lead to imminent disaster. I mean, literally, or will lead to disaster. Politically, humanitarianly, if that's even a word, on a humanitarian level. He's going to destabilize neighboring countries. It's just, all of it is so insane. I don't even know what else to say other than that. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. If you guys like this video, please like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, and until further ado, I am out. Peace.